From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And first up today, K-State's Mykel Taylor will talk about the flex lease approach to renting crop ground, which is drawing more attention from producers, she says. Mykel will explain how a flex lease works, saying that it offers an alternate way of distributing crop production risk between tenant and landlord. Then from Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services here at K-State, Forrest Buhler will look at the expanded range of service that program can now provide to you producers who are contending with financial challenges. And further ahead, this week's K-State Horticulture segment, Gregg Eyestone will join us to talk about selecting and caring for poinsettia plants during the upcoming holiday season. All that and more next on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Welcome to another Agriculture Today on the K-State Radio Network. Glad to have you along. During this first segment, we're going to return to the topic of crop ground leasing arrangements. That is always topical, it seems, but particularly as we finish off another production year, head into the winter, a great lot of planning goes into what's going to happen with those leasing arrangements next year. We've brought by Mykel Taylor. She's an agricultural economist with K-State Research and Extension, and she's of late been sharing information about one crop ground leasing option that she says she's receiving more and more questions about steadily now. That's called the flex lease. And Mykel, this is something a bit different from traditional leasing agreements, right?
Yes, flex leases are, the best description would be a hybrid between a crop share and a fixed cash lease. They generally have components of both. So a typical flex lease is going to have a base cash rent that's going to be fixed and agreed to in advance. And then they'll have the flexing component, which is where landlord and tenant will share a portion of the revenue over and above total costs at the end of the season. So if they have a good year, it'll flex up and you'll get essentially a bonus payment. And if you have a bad year, then some arrangements will flex down. Some of them will just cap it at the base that they are negotiated.
So that is the general structure of a flex lease. Why would one want to create a flex lease?
Well, as you mentioned, I have been getting some more requests just from people who want to consider flex leases. And I think the interest is stemming from the amount of market volatility that we've had over the last few years, and people being a little bit frustrated that they negotiate a cash rent and then it leaves one party or the other with a short end of the stick because crop prices either go way up or they go way down, and then you have to come back and renegotiate that fixed cash lease again and again. So you don't have the adjustment that you can have in a crop share, but there's also simplicity to those cash leases. So that's where people are wanting to come up with something that's kind of in the middle.
All right. Well, let's get into this a little more, perhaps by way of illustration, explain how this might work. It starts with that base leasing amount, that base rate. How is that determined?
Well, the thing to keep in mind is that with flex leases, I have never seen two alike. So they're as unique as the people that are negotiating them. But yes, typically you have a fixed cash base, and that can be negotiated a couple different ways. Sometimes people will look at USDA NASS rental rates, and that'll get them in the ballpark for where an average lease might be. And so you might start at that for your base cash rent. If you have really good ground, then you might go up a little bit. If you have below average ground, you might go down a little bit. But that gives you an average payment on the land that just assumes average returns to land that we've seen over the last couple of years. From there, though, you're going to have a flexing component. Right. And that is the part that essentially allows landowners to benefit if the farmer gets such a good return on the crop, either because of prices or yields or both.
both. So again, this can be tailored, as you say, to the situations that would be important to landlord and tenant individually or paired up. So you're looking at production levels, revenue, market prices, costs. How does one start crafting that flexible part of this?
So I said they were flexible. I didn't say they were easy.
Right. That's to be stressed here.
Yes. So the thing about the flex leases is that there are a lot of data components to them in order to do the calculations to decide about how you're going to flex and what amount you're going to flex on. And so the key to this is that you have a lot of transparency with your landowner and that you explain to them, okay, these are the pieces of information that we need. This is where we're going to collect them from. This is where the prices are going to come from. This is where the yields are going to come from. And that is agreed to by both parties, and that it's a very transparent process for gathering that data and making those calculations.
Well, as we look at maybe an example of how this would work, and you have put an example together as part of a presentation on flex leasing that you'll be sharing over the late fall and winter months, you're assuming something within that calculation called a flex percentage. What is that?
Okay, so once you have your base, then the flexing portion of the lease is that you take total costs and you subtract those from gross revenue, and that would be the flex amount, or the amount that is essentially bonus on top of, so you covered your total costs with your gross revenue. And then oftentimes people will agree to share that bonus revenue in a 60-40 split, or, some other combination, 35 to 40% going to the landowner.
And that can really, quote, flex that percentage, if you will.
Yes. And, where does that number come from? Again, it's from talking with people and hearing how they set up their flex leases and what they're willing to split that bonus revenue at, the proportion at.
But there has to be consensus on both parties on so many things here. What data will be used for yield calculations, what prices will be used. So it's obvious that both parties have to talk all of that through.
Yes, communication is key. This is not a lease for just, signing it and not worrying about talking to the landowner again for a couple of years. It doesn't work like that. You really have to put together good expectations of communication. So putting together a form that highlights exactly how you made the calculations and where you got the information, and presenting that to the landowner every year so that everybody is on board with how you got it. Probably the worst thing that can happen is a miscommunication where one year you get that bonus flex and the next year you don't, and they don't understand why. Right. That can just lead to some problems if there's misunderstanding there.
Lest there be any doubt, this has to be in writing.
Yes. And I would encourage you, there's a couple of different websites you can go to. Ag Lease 101. You can Google that. You can also go to Ag Manager and look for example leases, example flex leases that you can use to start getting something down in writing and going from there. I understand that people don't always do written leases, and that's okay. Handshake agreements are acceptable as well. But for a flex lease, I really encourage that to be in writing, just so that everybody knows what's going on and how things are going to be calculated.
Well, earlier you touched upon this, but how a tenant would sell this idea to particularly an absentee landlord who may like simplicity as opposed to complexity. The idea of a flex lease might be hard to convince an individual to take on. But as you said, the risk can be mitigated for both parties, not just for the tenant.
Right. So, what this does is it guarantees the landowner a base payment, which they can make sure is sufficient to pay property taxes and insurance and some of their other expenses. And then they get the bonus, basically, of when the year is good, they get some of that additional income. They share in it. And so from the landowner perspective, if this is just a flex up only lease, it really can be quite a nice arrangement for them in terms of letting them take advantage of when things are good. And I think that's how you sell a landowner on it is you tell them, look, you're going to get your base payment no matter what, but, you'll also potentially get this bonus when we have good years, good yields, good prices, and so on and so forth. And when it comes to the data that you choose to collect and how you make the calculations, again, if you put it down on paper and you present it in a clear and concise way to your landowner, I don't think it has to be confusing at all or anything. It's just you don't want to keep that the kind of information to where you're not sharing it with them. But I think you can make it very doable for the absentee landowner who maybe is a little bit more removed from agriculture. I don't think it has to be something that you have to shy away from.
Quick last thought here, though. You want to stress this, that, yes, we're talking about flex leases, but this is not to suggest that other traditional leases don't have value out there, the cash rent or even the crop share, for those who are still going about it that way. They're still perfectly viable. Right.
Absolutely. And in Kansas, we have about 60% cash leases, about 35% crop share, and then about 5% flex leases. So we don't have a large number of flex leases. But as I said earlier, I'm getting a lot more calls. So I just wanted to share with people, what some of those might look like, keeping in mind that you can negotiate all kinds of different caveats to how you do the calculations and customize it to make it your own.
Well, producers, landlords, if you're so inclined, look into this further. Mykel shared places you can go to check it out, and one of those would be the agmanager.info website. You can also search online for Ag Leases 101, which can give you good information about this alternative as well. Mykel, as always, we appreciate it. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
That from agricultural economist Mykel Taylor of K-State Research and Extension, the attributes and the inner workings of what we're calling here the flex leasing arrangement for crop ground. Now this break. When we come back, we'll visit with a longtime staff member with Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services here at Kansas State University. Already, that office is doing brisk business working with agricultural producers as they're attempting to find their way around financial obstacles. We'll tell what the CAMS program can provide toward that end in a few moments here on Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local Extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
We're back now on Agriculture Today, and in the guest chair for this segment, over from the Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services office here on campus, which is a function of K-State Research and Extension, Forrest Buhler. Forrest is the longtime staff attorney with that program. Forrest, to remind folks, the CAMS program assists farm families when financial issues and challenges emerge, right?
That's correct. That's been kind of the focus of our program since our inception about 31 years ago. And we assist folks with working with their lenders and lenders working with producers because we are there for both of those parties to try and help them develop a plan and work through some difficult financial situations that actually they both may be facing in that respect.
And in just a second, we want to talk with you about what you and your staff are encountering as you visit with and work with farm families here so far in the fall and eventually winter of 2019. But you point out that the 2018 Farm Bill has allowed for extra, if you will, service. Is that correct?
That's correct. As part of that Farm Bill, Congress allowed ag mediation programs across the nation to do some other types of mediation. So far, we've kind of been limited to ag credit and USDA adverse decisions, but they saw the need and the programs indicated to them the need for some other types of mediation that would be helpful to farm families. We have basically 5 new types of disputes that we can do. One is agricultural lease disputes. In my 30-plus years in office, that's probably the favorite question of people around the state. But now we have a provision in the law that allows us to use mediation to help them formulate and contract a new lease or to resolve some difficulties with a current lease.
So that's big, really, given what goes on out there.
It really could be. And it's a very valuable service because we can offer financial and legal assistance with that process to kind of give them some ideas and input on how to structure and make that lease fair for everyone. One of the things that we're really excited about, though, is the family farm transition mediation. Much of the agricultural land is going to be transferring over the next decade or two, and we've already have a program on base with the CAMS program to help people with farm succession planning, to have a facilitator work with families to ask the right questions, keep them on track, give them some resources that they can work through that transition successfully. And so now we've been required to have folks pay out of their own pocket for that service, but now with the grant being able to do those types of mediation, we can offer that to them at a very reasonable cost. We also look at doing farmer-neighbor disputes. That's probably going to be urban versus rural to a certain extent, but other things like boundary disputes or fence line disputes could also come into play under that section. And then Congress realized that some of the programs across the nation, like us, provide services like financial counseling and legal assistance, and realized that to really effectively sometimes avoid mediation, those services can be used to prevent problems in the future. And so they allowed us to do that without having to have a mediation in place to provide those services. And so we can offer financial counseling and legal assistance in that respect as well.
So CAM's scope of activity has widened considerably, but that's not to say that the original purpose and functions of the program have changed either. You're still doing the things you've done for 30-some years.
Absolutely. Those are still issues, as everyone out there knows. Agriculture cycles in and out of good and bad times, and so those are still a vital part of what we do.
So, Forrest, in that you have undoubtedly interacted with producers already here as we are getting deeper into the fall. What stresses are you observing out there as you talk with farm families?
Well, what we're seeing is kind of what we've been seeing for the last 3 or 4 years, but in a more exaggerated form. We're seeing lots of carryover debt on lines of credit, for example. Loans that have been refinanced or restructured are now coming due again and producers not being able to pay those payments. One thing that we're seeing, though, that is starting to be a regular effect is borrowers are upside down on their loans, where the value of their assets is less than what is owed by that producer. That makes it very difficult to restructure if you don't have any equity that's left to do that. Credit card debt seems to be on the rise again. A common thing, too, is to every conversation nowadays is some form of partial liquidation to get the debt down so that they can have something to manage it better according to the needs of their operation.
You have been at this again for 3 decades plus, so how does the current set of conditions compare to past times of stress in farm country?
Well, I think in the past, in the 80s, there were some land values that dropped precipitously. That's been kind of slow, but at the same time, it's the same type of thing that we're seeing because equities are being eroded either by a drop in value or by borrowing money against that equity to try and take care of those losses that have been incurred. Banks are also experiencing some difficulties as well. We probably don't see quite as many banks going under and FDIC type arrangements as we did back then. But banks are also experiencing those tight margins and having the difficulties working with producers that way. So those are some common things to the 80s that I think we're seeing out there that producers are experiencing.
Generally, then, as you and your staff would advise producers, what sorts of actions can they take? And as part of that, what can CAMS lend in assistance toward that end?
Well, I think one of the things that we see would be very helpful and that we hear from lenders all the time is let's start talking about this. Contact us. We really have a lot of services that can be offered in that respect, but one of the key things of working with lenders is communicating with them and making sure that you develop a plan about how you're going to work through things. So if this year's harvest was just not enough and you're going to be short, start thinking about that. Call us and get hooked into our services to help develop a plan so that you can communicate effectively with the lender about how you're going to work out of it.
That's where your companion program farm analyst can come into the picture.
Precisely. The K-State Research and Extension Farm Analyst Program runs the FinPac computer program that can work with producers to analyze profitability and the feasibility of different options that might be available to restructure or refinance the debt. They go out to your farm. They work with you there and develop that objective plan that creditors respect and work with you on that in that respect. It's also kind of important to take advantage of our legal assistance as well, to understand what your legal obligations are, as well as your rights and options so that you can develop a strategy to work with your creditors in that respect. Both of those services can be offered to you at a very reasonable cost. The Farm Analyst Program would be $150, covering everything associated with what we do for you. The legal assistance is at a low rate based on your income, starting out at $20 an hour and going on up to a maximum of $80 an hour. So it's just good basic advice to get you in a position where you can work with your creditors and communicate with them effectively to work out of the situation.
And, of course, it's important to leave folks with the contact information. CAMS is easily accessible many ways.
We have a toll-free number, 1-800-321-3276, and the last four numbers are FARM, F-A-R-M. We also have a website that has a lot of really good information on it, www.k-state.edu/CAMS, K-A-M-S. It has information about all the services that we've talked about and a special page on succession planning if you're interested in that. So those are the ways that you can get a hold of us.
Very well. Do want to note a momentous occasion before we let you go. For if folks want to tap into Forrest Buhler's abilities and skills, they need to hasten that along for you after 31 years of dutiful service with the program are retiring here relatively soon, we hear.
That's correct. I am retiring, and I am 67 years of age. I read an article the other day on when to retire your cow, and it has some wisdom in it about in terms of a cow's age. I am 14 years old as far as a cow is concerned, and so I'm looking forward to retirement and somebody else taking this program over and taking it into the future. So I'm very fortunate to have worked with a good team over the years of farm analysts and mediators and attorneys and my own staff here at K-State. So it's been a wonderful ride.
And your services have been invaluable to so many people out there. Congratulations on a well-deserved retirement. Thanks for coming over, Forrest, as always.
Thank you, Eric.
Staff attorney with Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services here at Kansas State University, Forrest Buhler. Agriculture Today will be back here on the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network, now in our 95th year of broadcast service to agriculture in Kansas and the Central Plains. Eric Atkinson here. Now today's agricultural news headlines for you, these courtesy in part of DTN. This just reported China's chief trade negotiator has invited his American counterparts for a new round of face-to-face talks. This according to people briefed on that matter. The President Xi Jinping's point person on the trade negotiations, Liu He, extended that invitation to U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin to hold that meeting in Beijing. U.S. negotiators have indicated they would be willing to meet in person, according to the sources, but that they would be reluctant to trek across the Pacific unless China makes it clear that it would make commitments on intellectual property protection, forced technology transfers, and agricultural purchases. Meantime, Chinese Commerce Ministry spokesman Zhao Feng said today that the two sides have been keeping in close touch. Chinese officials hope that the in-person negotiations can take place before next Thursday's Thanksgiving holiday here in the U.S., but the U.S. side has not yet committed to a date. Some have cited officials saying they believe a deal is likely by year's end. Others have expressed skepticism. Zhao described such reports as outside rumors that are not at all reliable. A fresh set of tariffs is due to take effect on December the 15th on about $160 billion of Chinese exports to the U.S. Now, earlier in the week, President Trump had indicated he was, in fact, prepared to go ahead with more tariff hikes if he does not get a deal with China that he likes. Pressures are building on Democrats from rural areas, many of whom are facing tough re-elections in 2020, according to Bloomberg in a report this week. The group pushing their party leaders to complete the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Trade Pact before the end of the year to give them a solid legislative achievement, but also to undercut GOP criticism that they're doing nothing but impeachment. An agreement between House leaders and Trade Representative Lighthizer is close to being done, with enforcement provisions on labor and environment still being ironed out, according to the Bloomberg report. AFL-CIO President Richard Trukma met with freshman Democrats on Tuesday to convey the message that it is important to strengthen labor enforcement in the final deal. Representative Cindy Axne of Iowa said she told Trumka that while she supported the enforcement of labor regulations, farmers and manufacturers in her district were hurting due to the trade war and tariffs, which a new trade agreement would help alleviate. And Representative Anthony Bradini of New York, as he left the meeting with Trumka, said he was sent to Congress by the people of his district to get things done, and one of those big-ticket items is a solid trade deal with Mexico and with Canada. And temporary emergency shipment of propane from Texas to Midwest states has now been approved by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. The pipeline company is asking for the action to said the record demand for propane is due to an unusual coincident increase in heating demand resulting from unseasonably cold weather in the region and crop drying demand. Farmers across the Corn Belt are running into supply bottlenecks at a time when they can ill afford to wait. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration declared a regional emergency in Kansas, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. And the International Grains Council today raised its forecast for global grain production, a surprise move driven by improving prospects for the American corn crop. The organization nudged its forecast for grain output in the 1920 season higher to 2.16 billion metric tons, up from 2.15 billion in its October report. The IGC lifted its forecast for American corn output by 3 million metric tons, saying that yields had been better than expected and that strong harvests in the European Union and Ukraine would likely produce a record barley crop. Analysts had expected the IGC to cut its grain production outlook again, as a third year of drought in Australia is hurting that country's wheat crop. Australia's farming woes have boosted wheat prices in recent weeks, but the IGC left its wheat forecasts largely unchanged. Coming your way now on Agriculture Today, this week's Kansas soybean update. Here's Gregg Eyestone.
Kitra Cooper is joining us. She is one of the co-chairs of the Women Managing the Farm Committee, and the 2020 Women Managing the Farm Conference, Kitra, is not too far away on February 13th and 14th.
Yes, in Manhattan at the Hilton Garden Inn. We also do have some pre-conference tracks scheduled on Wednesday, February 12th, and registrants can sign up for those too, in addition to the regular conference if they want.
What's its main purpose?
Its main purpose is to bring together women involved in all aspects of agriculture. It began as a way for women who are on the farm producing crops, or landowners that are just not quite sure how to handle all the business aspects of it could come together and learn. And we've really expanded from then. We have women from ag industry. We've got women who work in conservation and natural resources, but it is still geared toward women who work in agriculture.
And what are some of the highlights going to be for the 2020 conference?
We keep the same format every year, but one of the fun things is that we rotate our keynote speakers. And an interesting one this year is going to be a one-woman dramatic play on farmland transfer. The play is called Map of My Kingdom.
You also have an early bird registration deadline coming up.
We do. We've extended this year. We're going to have registration open, but we're going to run early bird registration through January 17th. And we're keeping the rate at $150 this year for early bird.
And the Kansas Soybean Commission is one of many sponsors for your sessions.
Yes, we are actually offering a new item this year. It's going to be a commodity organization-sponsored breakfast on Friday morning. So we're going to let the commodity organizations come in and talk a little bit about what they do. They're going to sponsor the breakfast, and then our keynote speaker during that time is going to be Chad Hart, crop market specialist and professor of economics at Iowa State University.
Kitra, I know there are some scholarship deadlines. What are these scholarships about?
The scholarships are an opportunity that would provide to women who would like to attend a conference and could really benefit from it, but maybe just can't quite come up with the $150 registration fee. So there is a scholarship application online on our website, and I encourage anybody interested who has a need for that to go in and apply.
And if people want to register, want to see the agenda and all the great speakers that are coming, they can go to the website?
Yes, we've got everything on there. We're going to be updating it very soon here with the rest of our keynote speaker information and opening up registration.
That is womenmanagingthefarm.com. Kitra Cooper, one of the co-chairs of the Women Managing the Farm Conference Committee about the 2020 event, February 13th and 14th, joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Thanks, Greg. Greg Akagi there. And we'll return with more in a few moments here on Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
Next up for you on Agriculture Today, this week's horticulture segment. It's about houseplants, including one of those favorites at this time of the year as the holidays come on, poinsettias. Joining us again is Riley County Extension Horticultural Agent Gregg Eyestone to remind us of some basics concerning maintaining those plants indoors. But let's start with the seasonal, that is the poinsettia. Very popular, and if folks haven't secured one for the holiday, or more than one, there's still plenty of time to do that, Greg.
Yeah, this is probably prime time, large selection available out there. And when you're selecting one, you just want to look for a healthy plant. And the poinsettia, we actually look at the bracts is what we notice, the colorful bracts, modified leaves, but the flower itself is in the center of that, and we'll be showing some color as it starts to mature, typically yellow, and so you want to look really at that when you're selecting as far as the maturity of your quality of your poinsettia that you're trying to select. The main thing is getting one that's still pretty viable and alive, and they will be at this time of the year. Those bracts stay colorful for a very long period of time, so even if you get one that's a little older than than maybe a younger one, it'll still be very colorful for the holiday season.
What would be a visual signal that maybe a poinsettia has an issue? Is there anything in particular?
I think basically looking just at the bracts and the leaves themselves, you can go ahead and fill the potting media and make sure that it's staying moist. That's probably the most critical thing on keeping your poinsettia for the season is the watering practices that you select. And basically we just want a moist soil. Definitely if you get it too wet, that can be a real problem. And the plant probably won't recover if you get it too wet. So you want to make sure there's good drainage in the potting media and also in your container. Oftentimes there may be some covering foil or something like that over the container itself, but you want to make sure that there's drainage for the watering practices that you have.
With that in mind, this is a semi-arid loving plant, so it can be overwatered.
It can be overwatered if we get a little bit negligent on our watering. It wilts down a little bit. You may lose a few leaves, a few bracts, but it will probably perk back up. So if you're going to err on the dry side, but nobody wants a wilted-looking plant, so just go ahead and fill that media. First day or two, you may want to check it regularly, and then you'll find a place in your house that works for you, and you may get to a regime of watering it maybe every 2 or 3 days, depends on your location.
How sensitive, Gregg, are poinsettias to humidity, and in particular dry areas in the house?
Yeah, and any of our indoor plants, we probably want to stay away from drafts, whether it be near the windows or doors and things like that. It would be ideal for them to be in a more controlled environment for them. Humidity is something that is probably lacking in all our homes during the winter season, and most of our plants will tolerate it fine. Really just making sure you keep it watered is the main thing, that it has moist soil for any of our house plants and not overwatered. Overwatering is still probably the number one killer of indoor plants, so just make sure you're checking your plants and don't overwater them.
How about sun exposure for the poinsettia now?
Poinsettias, they would like a bright light during the day. Temperature-wise, 70 degrees is good. Any of our blooming plants, if we can cool them down a little bit at nighttime, that'll make them last a little longer. Maybe not necessarily as important for poinsettias, but other plants, the cooler at night, the longer those blooms will last. So 70s is a good temperature to keep them at. If you can cool them down a little bit at night, that'd be all right. We're looking at 60s to 80s is what temperatures we want our plants at.
Is there ever any reason for supplemental nutrients for either poinsettias or houseplants in general as we're entering the winter?
There is a time that is necessary, but this is probably not it. With our lack of sunlight energy coming into our homes, our goal is to keep our plants alive but not maybe stimulate growth. And so a little less water, no fertilizer. Poinsettias aren't going to need those till we get some spring growth. Probably March, April is when we can think about fertilizing most of our plants at that time.
Right. And one more thing before we leave the subject of this holiday plant. Folks often would like to, if they've been successful in maintaining their poinsettias, think about keeping them over, actually transplanting them outdoors during the growing season, bringing them back in and forcing that bloom for another Christmas holiday the next year. Is that worthwhile, right?
That's going to be an individual decision, whether you want that challenge. They will be serving just like any other basically indoor plant. You can take them out, get them more energy from the sunlight, let them go ahead and produce larger plants, and then it becomes a challenge bringing them back indoors. Sometimes they're too large for the space that you have, but sometime in September, if you wanted to, start tricking them into the bloom season. They naturally occur blooming in Christmas time down in Mexico, but we typically like to have them probably a month ahead of time, like this time of the year, and so that requires a little more effort to trick them into blooming so that you can enjoy them before Christmas, basically more so than after Christmas time.
Would they be high maintenance outdoors, say in the intense summer heat of Kansas?
They're from Mexico originally, and so they'll probably adapt pretty well to our growing conditions. It's just going to be your watering practices on those, and they really don't have a lot of pest problems outdoors, so it's really going to be the size that you end up with to bring back indoors and whether that's useful for you.
And whether you want to go to the trouble of maintaining that plant or simply reinvesting next fall.
That's right. That's a personal choice. I prefer the reinvestment each year.
Very well. But for poinsettias or other houseplants, it's a matter of rather low maintenance, but paying attention to specifics, water, of course, being primary among those.
That's really the thing we can control. If you want some more light on your plants, of course, you can use some artificial light to help them out. But typically, we're just going to go with what nature provides us, which is an abundance. And so we're just trying to keep them barely alive so that we can get them to the next growing season come March, April next year.
Keep an eye on them once in a while anyway.
Yeah, you're going to have to check the moisture and water them, but don't overwater them. That's the key.
Very good. Always a pleasure, Gregg. Thank you for coming over.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Gregg Eyestone with us. Gregg is the Riley County Extension Horticultural Agent for K-State. Once more, some thoughts on poinsettia and other houseplant care as we move on into this holiday season now. You can find out more on this topic and many others via the weekly K-State Horticulture newsletter that is easy to find online. All you need to do is search for K-State Horticulture Newsletter. It's a great resource. Check it out. That is this week's horticulture segment here on the broadcast. Remember, look into our podcast service as well at agtoday.net, agtoday.net. In the meantime, please be right back here with us tomorrow, won't you? Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.